Just coming home to your body as it is. And when it feels like the right time for you, you can gently and kindly let go of your awareness of bodily sensations and gently bring your attention to your in-breath and out-breath. Perhaps beginning at that first point of your body where air touches your nostrils and becomes what we call breath. Just resting your attention there and becoming aware of all of the cascade of sensations that make up an in-breath at that point. And then keeping your attention there, noticing the whole cascade of sensations that make up an out-breath at that point. If you notice that your attention is easily and gently resting in that area without any effort, you might like to begin to invite a sense of curiosity and exploration and follow the sensation of your in-breath as it enters your nostrils, finding the next touch point inside your nostrils. So breathing in, aware of that first point of contact at the tip of your nostrils, and then inside your nostrils, and breathing out that point of contact inside your nostrils, and then at the tip of your nose. And then slowly and gently, as you establish your mindful awareness with those points of contact, continue your exploration of your in-breath as it enters your nostrils, up through your sinuses, the back of your throat, down your windpipe, gradually and slowly adding further points of contact until you experience the sensations of your in-breath all the way through. And you experience the sensations of your out-breath all the way through. Taking your time to become aware in an exquisite fashion of this natural process of breathing in and breathing out. Not rushing this process of discovery. It might take many sessions of meditation, but simply going only as far as we're able to maintain a steady awareness. Breathing in, this is my in-breath, just as it is. Breathing out, this is my out-breath, just as it is. So, dear beloved community, one of the exciting things about living in the mountains is that our internet connections can be quite unpredictable in storms. So I hope you enjoyed your extended meditation this evening. I loved the possibility of changing locations. Life is full of surprises. And as practitioners, our opportunity is our invitation, and our opportunity is the invitation and the opportunity to show up for what is and to not wish it be any different. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to share this evening, it's quite rare that I step into the same river twice. But recently I gave a talk that felt to me as if there were still some elements that wanted to come forth. So in some way, I wanted to offer elements of that talk again this evening. It's something that's really been on my heart for these last few months. In Mahayana Buddhism particularly, we hear a lot about the cultivation of two qualities that are considered to be like the two wings of a bird: the quality of wisdom and the quality of compassion. A number of books and commentaries have been written about these two qualities and how we develop them, as well as ways in which they support and balance each other. For many of us, though, these qualities can remain only as ideals and concepts, and they can be hard to embody in a real and practical way. And so for the last couple of months, I've been contemplating these qualities. And it seems to me that one practical and concrete way to cultivate wisdom and compassion in our daily life is to understand that in a fundamental sense, wisdom is not generating unnecessary pain and suffering for ourselves, and compassion is not generating unnecessary pain and suffering for others. Honestly, often it's we ourselves who are our own worst enemies. True compassion begins to manifest when we're no longer afraid of our own or other people's suffering. For sure, this fearlessness and curiosity towards suffering is a lifelong process, and it's not something that happens overnight. To me, I feel that it begins by recognizing that there's nothing inherently wrong with pain, with discomfort, with dissatisfaction, or with suffering. They're not things to be gotten rid of in order for our spiritual practice or for our life to begin, or for us to finally get there, wherever there might be for us. There is much a part of our human experience as happiness is. And for our practice to be transformative and worthwhile, we bring our mindful attention to every single thing that arises in order to understand their causes and conditions. That's where real and embodied wisdom and insight arises from. Anything else is coming from the books that you've read or the talks that you've heard, and so on. It's not your own embodied wisdom. When we finally get it and this awareness begins to surface, we run away from pain less and less, and we stop running after some idea of happiness. We begin to experience our heart and ourselves as big enough to embrace both and to see that they contain each other. As much as it's our human tendency, it seems to me that it's only when we struggle against pain, against discomfort, and against confusion that these things become suffering. When we turn our attention towards our situation, towards our pain, towards our suffering, they become opportunities to open our heart. Rather than obstacles, they become invitations. Suffering's what emerges when we're stuck in the repetitive pattern that my teacher Thich, Hanh, calls the second arrow. There's the story of a person who's stabbed by an arrow. That's already a really painful experience. But imagine that that same person is stabbed by a second arrow in the same place. In that situation, the pain is not double, but it's multiplied 100 times over. There's the experience, but then there's the story we tell ourselves about the experience, the interpretation we make, or as I like to call it, the what ifs, rather than the what is. For me, as someone who has the great chance to practice with physical illness, with pain, and with weakness, being constantly diligent and attentive to the difference between the what is and the what if in each and every moment is essential. As meditators, we diligently practice to recognize the difference between these two and cultivate the capacity to stay with what is, rather than in the realm that often we're more comfortable in, the what ifs. When we do this, while pain may still be there, suffering is lessened. In this human realm, pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. So to understand the second arrow in your own life, take a look at the stories you tell yourselves about the experiences that you have. And see if you can differentiate them from your bare experience. How does it feel when you smile to the story and you thank it for being there, but ask yourself if you're sure that it's the truth? The third Zen ancestor, Master Sun Zan, in his poem Faith in Mind, Xin Xing Ming, he wrote, "The great way is not difficult if only you don't pick and choose." What an invitation this is into a radical openness to our life right now and to ourselves just as we are right now, and not seeking to manipulate it, of not getting caught in pairs of opposites, of picking and choosing happiness over suffering, the ultimate over the relative, this over that. If you've had a real insight into impermanence, then you'll know that even if you try to hold on to something, it's going to change anyway. In fact, it's already changed. It's already changing despite your best efforts, despite your desperate attempts to prevent it from changing. And in-breath, for example, is changing from moment to moment. At an almost imperceptible moment, it becomes an out-breath. In my own experience, pain is not one thing, not one solid, unchanging thing, and neither is happiness, nor are other feelings. They're a series of events, an endless flowing river that's never the same from moment to moment. What would it be like to have the courage to practice to not have a problem with whatever's arising in you? To just be with it. And more importantly, to look deeply into it. What would that wisdom look like in your own life? What would that healing look like? Without wanting to become too dogmatic, I really wish that we would move away from using words such as positive or negative to describe our feelings, our emotions, and our experiences. All of the feelings and emotions that we have are natural parts of our human experience, and they're not inherently good or bad. The original word in Pali that's often translated as positive is kusala, which is closer in meaning to skillful. And the word that we often see translated as negative, akusala, in its original sense is closer to meaning not yet skillful. These are, to me, very helpful lenses for us to look at the behaviors, emotions, mind frames, and tendencies that arise within us. Does this behavior, this feeling, this emotion lead to more freedom of my heart? Is it helping me to release my desperate grasping? Is it in line with my deepest aspiration? With these qualities, something can be called skillful. Whether emotions are positive or negative depends on how we work with them. Our practice is to bring clear awareness to look at our experience. And if we do so, then we might discover as we explore the roots of our anger, for example, that rather than being an obstacle, it's in fact a great teacher. It might even have an element of skillfulness. There's so much to discover. In Buddhism, happiness and joy come about when we develop the capacity to let go, to leave behind in each and every moment. One of the deepest letting goes, to me, is the practice of letting go of our agendas, the overt agendas we have and the hidden agendas. One word that we hear a lot in Buddhism is businesslessness. In fact, it's seen in some way to be the ultimate aim of the practice. What does it mean to cultivate the capacity of having nothing to do anymore? There are many layers to this, but on one level, it means to become aware of all of our hidden agendas. I want to get rid of this painful thought, to get rid of this painful feeling, to get rid of this painful sensation or this difficult person. Or I want more of this pleasant sensation, this pleasant thought, this pleasant feeling, or this delightful person. I want more of this. I want less of that. Want. If we're not careful, it can become a massive hidden energetic thread in our practice. It's the shadow side. Actually, many times the thing that we want more of is actually our habit energy in disguise, our entrenchments in disguise. We often mistake our entrenchments for spiritual growth. This is really the shadow side. The often quite subtle difference between want and aspiration in this sense is an incredibly important one for us as practitioners to pay attention to. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. Many of us in this session this evening consider ourselves to be practitioners, and all of us are very wholehearted with our journeys. So for me, I fully admit that I'm a sutra nerd. I love to go back to the original texts. And as I was thinking about all of us as wholehearted practitioners, I was reading a beautiful text on the Buddha's description of what a wholehearted practitioner is and the qualities of a wholehearted practitioner. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, and so you can look it up for yourself. So the Buddha shares that a wholehearted practitioner has 5 qualities. The first is that they impose a little, only a little on others. They're easy to support physically and emotionally. I think in modern language, we could describe this as being low maintenance, that a wholehearted practitioner is not high maintenance. So that's a wonderful quality to have. The second quality is that they eat only a little food. Now, this doesn't mean that they starve themselves, but food here in the context of the Buddha's teaching is referring to the 4 kinds of nutriment: edible foods, sense impressions, the things we hear, the things we smell, the things we taste and touch and think about, and so on. Volition, our aspiration, that which moves us forward, and consciousness itself. So becoming aware of the inputs that we have through all of these sense doors and how we respond to them. That's what the Buddha means about eating only a little food, that we notice what we're nurturing within ourselves. The third is that they're devoted to mindfulness or wakefulness. The character for mind or heart in Chinese is the same. Additionally, so it's equally possible to translate sati, which from the Pali language, which is usually translated as mindfulness, as heartfulness. And I think this, as I've shared before, is very helpful medicine for us in this time, because many of us can be caught up in our mind. We can approach our spiritual life, our meditation practice, as a mental exercise only when it is a practice of deep embodiment. The fourth quality of a wholehearted practitioner that the Buddha describes in the Anguttara Nikaya is that they live in an isolated place. On one level, of course, this might mean being in a quiet abode, but actually that's only the external level. We can be in a quiet forest place and still have a very active mind. So rather, this fourth quality of living in an isolated place is a very deep invitation from the Buddha to both be aware of our tendency to be pulled this way and that by our sense impressions, and at the same time, as we're taught in the Bhattacharata Sutta, not to pursue the past, to not lose ourselves in the future, nor to be swept away by the present. And then the fifth quality is that they constantly review how free they are. They consider their situation in an active and an engaged way, and not in a passive way. They don't get comfortable. They keep reflecting and asking themselves, how free am I? How free am I today compared to yesterday? In Buddhism, the path of practice is often shared as the metaphor of crossing over to the other shore. In this metaphor, we have the image of standing on the shore of suffering and crossing over the flood, the river. There are a number of responses when we see our situation, our suffering, when we're feeling the pull of the current of the river. One response is to just go with the flow. Another is that we can stand firm. We can decide that the best thing is to stand where we are and not be moved. The third is to go against the stream, to go against the current. And the fourth response that's possible is to cross over. So many times when we hear this metaphor of crossing over, we think, it's a beautiful metaphor, standing on the shore of suffering and then building myself a raft of the teachings and crossing over to a shore of liberation and then turning around and realizing that, in fact, although I've made this journey of 10,000 lifetimes of a single moment, crossed over this flood and gotten to the other shore, I've turned around and I realize I'm exactly where I began my journey, but everything has changed. And I would not have been in this place where everything has changed if I hadn't have made this journey. But at the same time, very few of us think about what exactly are the floods that we need to cross. What are the floods that we need to build a raft of the teachings to cross? In Buddhism, there are 4 floods that are described. They're called the 4 oka. The first is the flood of sensual desire, kamoga. Basically, this is the recognition that we're pulled in 1,000 directions by our senses. In each and every moment, our senses, our eyes, our ears, our tongue, our body, and our mind are being stimulated by so many contacts, sights, smells, and so on. And each of those contacts gives rise to a feeling, such a shade of feeling, such as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So in any moment, we're pulled towards some sensory inputs, we reject others, and others, they kind of just are a little bit dull. There's a stimulus, there's a response, and most of the time we don't even notice the inputs. The Buddha described this experience as being like a cow with no skin. So many of us at the end of the day, we're so exhausted and we don't even realize why we're exhausted. And this is because of all of the sensory inputs that we've been having through the day. The second is bhavoga, the flood of becoming. One of the pervasive mind states that many of us have is actually this feeling of dissatisfaction, a feeling of lack. One of the final words of the Buddha to us as his students was to work out our own liberation with all of our heart, with diligence. And this, for me, is a reminder, a constant reminder of our capacity. The Buddha wouldn't have wasted his last breath to tell us to put your best efforts for your own liberation if he thought we didn't have the capacity. So here, this is a great Dharma seal from the Buddha. The Buddha is telling you, not people 2,600 years ago, but you, that you have the capacity to wake up to your situation. You have the capacity to transform your suffering. What an amazing thing. How many of us have sat with that for a while and thought, the Buddha said I can do it. Why don't I finally, once and for all, admit that to myself, that I can do this, that I can transform my situation, that I don't need one more thing. In fact, the place that I'm in right now is the very perfect place in order to transform my suffering. The third flood is the flood of views, ditthogga. And there are many views. My teacher Thich, in the heart of the Buddha's teaching, shared something very pithy and something that I find quite powerful, that Buddhism is not there to give us a whole new set of views, a whole new worldview, but rather to release us from the prison of views. And then there is the fourth flood, which is avijjogga, which is the flood of ignorance. Ignorance, of course, in the Chinese language and Vietnamese language means an absence of light, of not seeing things clearly. These crossings over, of course, if you understand them in this way, are not a one-time journey, but a continual process. In Mahayana Buddhism, we emphasize what we call the bodhisattva ideal. Being a bodhisattva means being available when needed, with an emphasis on being available, not caught up in doing. Rather than focusing on externals, a bodhisattva sees to the heart of things in a non-dualistic way. In an earlier talk, I've shared that a bodhisattva is someone who befriends all things, including pain and suffering. A bodhisattva is not operating from a neurotic place of needing to get rid of something or needing to fix, but rather through their presence and their insight, they change the situation through their way of being. A bodhisattva practitioner includes all things, even, or perhaps especially, the things and the people and the experiences and the situations that we're afraid of. In my vehicle, I'll carry along all of my joys, all of my pain, all of my confusion, and I'm not going to see anything as worthless. And I'll do the same for everyone and everything that I think is other to me. For the idea that there's an other or there's some aspect of our own experience that can be considered to be separate from the path is an absolutely mistaken notion. To be willing to befriend everything. This is really the essence of the Bodhisattva path. It's also the essence of compassion. In Mahayana Buddhism, you'll see statues of Kuan Yin, Avalokitesvara, the archetypal bodhisattva of great compassion. It's often pictured with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. And these are symbolic of the many skillful ways that a compassionate mind and heart can manifest: gentle, fierce, active, passive, and so on. They're not 1,000 hands and eyes that are constantly meddling in your own or everybody else's business. When we think of compassion, we also think of skillful action, upaya. Upaya in Sanskrit, skillful action, is the outward manifestation of compassion. Compassion is nice. It's a beautiful quality. It's a quality we hear a lot of. But it actually doesn't have that much of an impact if we're just sitting on our cushion, cultivating the mind frame of compassion or the ideal of compassion, but not manifesting it outwardly, whether towards others or towards ourselves. It's actually quite a humbling thing to consider skillful action or upaya. How do we actually know if an action is ultimately skillful or not? If we as practitioners are looking deeply, then along with skillful action, could it be that occasionally that there's skillful non-action? Not in the sense of being uninvolved, but rather from a sense of holding space. The greatest teachers will always point you back to the wisdom within you, because in fact, you already know what you need to do. With any real insight into your own situation or insight into the world, situation of the world around, the quality of joy will arise. A serious practitioner is not necessarily solemn. If we have insight into the stories we tell ourselves, then it's impossible not to develop a sense of humor. I don't feel that serious practitioners are serious. Almost counterintuitively, along with letting go, this beautiful quality of letting go, which is one of the hallmarks of our spiritual path. In fact, many of us approach our spiritual path with the idea that our spiritual path is about getting something, getting enlightenment, getting liberation, getting happy, getting peace, whatever it might be. But in reality, as we mature as a practitioner, we discover that our spiritual path is really not about getting anything at all. It's about letting things go. And almost counterintuitively, along with letting go, a factor of awakening called joy or bliss, in Pali it's piti, arises. This quality wells up from within and saturates our being. To cultivate this quality and all the other qualities of awakening, the most important factor is appropriate attention. Now, I've said repeatedly, and in some communities controversially, that the Buddha didn't teach mindfulness. I maintain that view. The Buddha taught appropriate mindfulness, developing the capacity to direct our attention to internal and external objects of attention that nurture the kinds of qualities we want to see in our life. The Buddha taught us how to hone and develop this innate quality of attentiveness so that it becomes a vehicle for the path. In the Samyutta Nikaya, in a sutra called the Ahara Sutta, the Buddha shared that in order to nurture joy, we should simply direct our attention to those internal and external qualities that nurture joy within. It's very simple. What brings you joy? Focus more on it. What doesn't bring you joy? Focus less on it. That which we pay attention to will grow stronger. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. It seems to me that in our modern society, increasingly we're living in a transactional culture of entitlement, and this mindset has been very skillfully watered by society and also very skillfully watered and honed by ourselves. I think that this culture of entitlement can often prevent us from receiving others or their response to us as a gift. Often with this mindset, if people's offerings or response or behavior or so on is not exactly as we would expect, then we begin to feel hard done by and resentment begins to grow. One nice practice is to reflect every day on what we've received from the efforts of others, even if we think that we've paid for something. Someone put effort in to create that thing for us. Sure, maybe there might be a way that it could have been done better or differently, and it might be essential to communicate that, but the practice of reframing from our carefully cultivated and very carefully perfected attention to what's imperfect in any situation, to what's being done well, then rather than nurturing a seed of resentment or anger, we begin to experience things in a more balanced way. It might also be helpful to direct our attention to the things that are being done for us that we may not recognize. Speaking of suffering, which is an English translation of the Pali word dukkha, the Buddha was a very direct and concrete teacher, and he defined dukkha very clearly and concisely. And he said this in his very first recorded teaching. Now, this is the first noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, association with the disliked is suffering, separation from the light is suffering, not getting what you want is suffering. In summary, the five skandhas are suffering. By the way, I personally wish we would stop translating dukkha as suffering. It means something closer to ultimately unsatisfactory. It might be a good idea to spend a few moments to understand some of the roots of this word dukkha, this concept. Sukha, of course, is happiness and bliss, and dukkha is the opposite of that. It can be translated, as I shared just a few moments ago, as ultimately unsatisfactory, suffering, painful, and so on. Sariputra, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, gave us a very beautiful elaboration on the different aspects of suffering, expanding on the Buddha's pithy teaching. Sariputra says, so what is birth? Whatever birth, taking birth, descent, coming to be, coming forth, appearance of aggregates, acquisition of sense experiences and reactions to those of living beings is called birth. Now, I've spoken about the fact that birth, or jati in Pali, doesn't only refer to physical birth, but can also refer to moment by a moment arising and passing away of mental formations, of consciousness, of the cells in our body. So what's being born in you this moment? This is a helpful way to approach this insight into the nature of existence. What's being born in you? What's arising in you? What's growing? What's decaying in you in this moment? And then Sariputra continues, and what's aging? Whatever aging, decrepitude, brokenness, graying, wrinkling, decline of life force, weakening of the faculties of the various beings in this or that group, that is called aging. And what is death? Whatever deceasing, passing away, breaking up, disappearance, dying, death, completion of time, breakup of the aggregates, casting off of the body, interruption in the life force of the various beings in this or that group of beings, that is called death. And what is sorrow? Whatever sorrow, sorrowing, sadness, inward sorrow, inward sadness of anyone suffering from misfortune, touched by a painful thing, that's called sorrow. And what is lamentation? Whatever crying, grieving, lamenting, weeping, wailing, lamentation of anyone suffering from misfortune, touched by a painful thing, that's called lamentation. And what's pain? Whatever is experienced as bodily pain, bodily discomfort, pain or discomfort born of bodily contact, that is called pain. And what is distress? Whatever is experienced as mental pain, mental discomfort, pain or discomfort born of mental contact, that is called distress. And what is despair? Whatever despair, despondency, desperation of anyone suffering from misfortune, touched by a painful thing, that's called despair. And what is association with the unpleasant? There's the case where undesirable, unpleasing, unattractive sights, sounds, aromas, flavors, or tactile sensations occur to one. And what is the suffering of not getting what's wanted? In being subject to birth, the wish arises, may we not be subject to birth, and may birth not come to us. But this is not to be achieved by wanting alone. This is the pain of not getting what's wanted. In being subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, the wish arises, oh, may we not be subject to these things. But this doesn't come just by wanting. These, friends, are in brief what is the noble truth. So, reading this beautiful elucidation by Sariputra, it helps us to understand the Buddha's teaching in a very practical sense. And I find using Sariputra's elaboration as contemplations very helpful in order to understand our situation. And I recommend it to all of my friends. Sometimes people say that Buddhism is pessimistic because of the awareness of dukkha. However, I want to go on record saying that I feel that Buddhism is optimistic because the Buddha said that each one of us, not just each one of us in the idealistic sense, but you can transform your situation through generating the insight of the Four Noble Truths in your own life, right from the heart of your own experience. This is a very concrete and practical insight, a concrete and practical practice. Dukkha, your suffering, not just a general idea of suffering, but clearly directing our attention to whenever we experience something in the categories mentioned above. It's to be understood, and the root of that suffering understood and let go of. The realization that it's possible to transform this suffering, and that the Buddha has provided us with a concrete practice to be able to transform our suffering. Our real issue is whether we put it into practice or not. As Buddhist practitioners, I want to make the invitation that I made in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha a couple of months ago. And that is, I would like us to each make a commitment to ourselves and to each other. From now on, we're going to stop moaning and complaining about suffering. It's part of the way things are in this samsaric realm. If we really take on board the concrete and empowering practice of the Four Noble Truths, then within the context of the first noble truth, suffering is to be understood. The task it offers us is the task of understanding. In that way, just like a school teacher, it's a great teacher. It's assigning us the task of full understanding. That's the role of a teacher. Why do we think suffering is to be gotten rid of? It's not to be gotten rid of, it's to be transformed. I think that we need to really put our 2 feet on the ground and be really honest with ourselves and look into what we think transformation actually is. Does it mean that there's no more pain? Does it mean that there's no more discomfort? Does it really mean that there's no more separation from those that we love? Does transforming suffering mean that there's no more physical death or grief? Is such an experience possible in this samsaric realm? Could our idea of what transformation is actually be preventing us from touching it? The noble truth of dukkha, of unsatisfactoriness, of suffering, of pain, is this basic insight that we expect happiness from states and things which are impermanent. And therefore, we cannot attain real and lasting happiness, only at best momentary tastes. A solid practitioner, rather than blaming everyone and everything, practices to look deeply and to understand each situation of our life from within as honestly and thoroughly as possible. Dear community, it's been an absolute joy to be together with you this evening. I hope that you've received something from the talk this evening. It's certainly been my delight to share it with you. I'd like to invite everybody to take a few moments to close our eyes and to consider our situation, to consider the situation around us. There are many difficult places on earth at this moment in time, people who are in a lot of suffering at this moment in time. So we might bring to mind some of those places or some of those people that we would like to dedicate the energy of tonight's practice to. So just hold them in our hearts. There might also be areas of our own heart, our own experience that we'd like to dedicate the energy, the merit of tonight's practice to. So just holding the images of those people, those places, those situations, or those areas of our own heart in our mind. Let's wish that they also experience a moment of relief, a moment of joy, a moment of clarity, a moment of peace. We'll end with the sound of the bell.